Hello, and welcome to another edition of Your Therapist Needs Therapy. I am your host, Jeremy Schumacher. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. Today, we're going to talk about something that popped up for me recently. I think my preambles are often off topic and maybe unhelpful, but this one might be somewhat helpful to at least frame why I'm talking about this. I recently saw a organization that I'm a part of that I appreciate, that I like, get very excited about a very famous therapist they were going to have come and talk. And my response was, ugh, yuck. Do people not know that's not somebody we should still be celebrating? And, if you struggle to believe that I'm fun at parties, I'm not. I'm an introvert. I don't go to parties. Um, I am wary of sort of the purity test, especially among, I would say, like the American left, that I think is unsustainable. And one of the things with therapy and therapists not being awesome people all of the time is it gets a little dicey when, like, I also don't think that highly of that therapist's work. And also, there's a ton of nuance to this, right? And so it's more nuanced than like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is some sort of, I don't know, old-timey idiom that we've kept around. And also, like, there's really good critiques, especially of therapists who become gurus, or gurus who become church leaders, or church leaders who become cult leaders, or anybody who starts to love the smell of their own farts a bit too much and thinks that they singularly have unlocked some sort of version of the capital T truth. And look, myself included, I put hours of content out on the internet every single week. And like, I don't think that's warranted. It would be a bad cult leader because I'm like, I don't know. Fuck do I know? Why is anyone listening to me? Why do I put hours of content out? I've been pretty clear about that, because if one person stops listening to Joe Rogan and listens to me instead, then the world is a better place. I was socialized as a straight white male, and while two of those things are still true, I guess I still have that white guy privilege confidence where I put out a lot of content, and hopefully it maintains more nuance and is backed by good science than a lot of other guys who have the confidence and absolutely have not earned it or deserve it. I would love to live in a world where everybody has their basic needs met and I don't have to put out stuff like this for free because people can just afford to go to therapy. That would be cool. Anyway, see, now we're off topic. My preamble was on point for a minute and a half, and then a minute and a half, not so much. Is IFS a cult? Seemed like too risky of a headline to put in the title for legal reasons. And also, I think that's the wrong question to be asking. I am interested in why we, as a culture, speaking of therapists here, like a community of therapists, a culture of therapists, why do we, who by and large hold that evidence-based practices are important, continue to entertain people who don't have evidence-based practices? And why do we speak out against systems that then we continue to participate in as if like that won't cause some sort of moral injury for us? So I don't want to do an episode just taking shots at IFS, because honestly, I think IFS is super helpful to a ton of people. I think the way that IFS is helpful is people are not practicing it the way that Richard Schwartz, the creator of IFS, wants people to practice. And I think that's okay. I would argue that's good because he seems not great. I saw him speak once way back in the day, before he was super famous. And I was like, well, all right. And yeah, basically, I've said this in a bunch of other places. I will say it here. My stance on IFS is it is narrative therapy for people who are bad at coming up with their own metaphors. And all my lovely IFS therapists who I am friends with who have benefited from IFS therapy on their own can be offended at that in a way that is fine, because I don't mean it as judgment. I mean it as like, yeah, if coming up with metaphors on the fly and doing all that stuff that narrative therapy does really well, if that is unwieldy to you because it's a little too chaotic or it's not specific enough, that's fine. Then something like IFS is really great. Do I think we have a core essence, capital C, capital E, that is the capital S self inside of us, and that there are all these capital P parts that make up that core self, that essence? No, I don't. I absolutely don't. I think that's nonsense, and I think that's not falsifiable. It's not good science, and I think that is what Richard Schwartz truly believes, and that is how he wants people to practice IFS. He also thinks demons are real. They're unattached burdens, and they're a potential problem for us all. And again, that's bad science. That is, I would argue, bad religion. Yeah, it's a modern update of Freud. That's not true. Well, I have said before, it is on my YouTube channel, Freud is one of the worst therapists of all time, along with Jordan Peterson and Dr. Phil. Richard Schwartz isn't on that list because I bet Richard Schwartz does dope therapy. I bet if you have him as your therapist, he's super helpful. And like, that's the nuance here, right? I don't really take issue with the practice of IFS. I take issue with Richard Schwartz's personal beliefs. And again, if he wrote the books and just had a small therapy practice, cool. I would have no issue with the guy. The idea that IFS is behind a huge paywall and he rakes in a lot of money for speaking when, again, he's not somebody that we should be platforming given his unscientific stance on a lot of things that he talks about, I take issue with him. And it makes me not want to engage with some of the organizations that I like that don't see that. Especially when the organizations that I like are really driven by science. And then it's like, oh, cult of personality, I guess. But like, so what's the thing here, right? Freud, I brought up Freud. Freud got most of his stuff wrong. Really, the only thing that Freud got right, and my psychoanalyst friends, haha, just kidding, I don't have anybody because less than 1% of therapists are doing psychodynamic work, and they shouldn't be. I will fight that. Pretty much the only thing Freud got right was defense mechanisms. And again, like, that's more of a understanding of like how human beings respond to things as a pattern recognition more than like this defense mechanism is hardwired into your brain's nature. Like, it's not. But the id and ego and superego also are not real things, and people practicing that way shouldn't be. Do I have issue with ego and id and superego as metaphor? Not really, which is probably where like psychodynamic therapists would go and be like, it's not real. It's metaphor. Again, like, I take issue with non-scientific things like EMDR parading around as science. And I think EMDR is super helpful for people. I take issue with non-scientific things parading around as religion, but then people giving it the benefit of the doubt as being scientific, like IFS. I'm a systems therapist. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I work with entities that exist within various ecosystems. I think that is scientific. And I think it allows for enough nuance and isn't up its own ass about how great it is in a way that's really approachable. It works really well. It's backed by a bunch of science. I can pull in other schools of thought and other things, and it doesn't upset the balance of my therapy because my therapy is informed by science and not dogmatic about anything. again, if I was like a Bohemian therapist and was like, structure, 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 and here's all the triangulation in your family, and oh no, you're enmeshed, and oh no, I have all that stuff. I was taught all that stuff. I'm not dogmatic about it. I'm sure someone out there is, right? It could be dogmatic about humanistic therapy from Carl Whitaker, I guess. Or you could be like, I'm a purist and I only practice cybernetics. And like, if you're not a therapy nerd and you're definitely not a family therapist, you're like, why is he bringing cybernetics into it? Because it doesn't even make sense. It's not even a word that we ascribe to therapy anymore. So again, I mean, my issue is with dogmatic therapists who are not willing to entertain or engage with criticism of their chosen field. And again, I brought up the paywall earlier. I think it's because therapists spend a lot of money to get certified and qualified to do therapy that like there is this idea that then we should use those trainings, and that if it's helpful, like that was worthwhile. And again, therapists aren't special. We have our own cognitive biases and we fall prey to the same cognitive biases as everyone else. So like a sunken cost fallacy of like, man, I spent a couple grand on this training and it took me 2 years to get certified. So like, right, that person is not really invested in finding reasons why the therapy is bad. They're pretty strongly invested in making sure the therapy is great and that they love it and it works really well. And all the clients who it's not a good fit for are the problem, not the therapy itself. And like, that's a problem. Again, we as therapists need to be a lot better about it. We should not be dogmatic. The scientific process includes learning things and unlearning them and relearning them and updating them when new information becomes available. The idea of like getting our continuing education is that we stay up to date on things. The reality of the way that conferences are set up and continuing ed actually works is just a lot of confirmation bias. It's not so much that we're being challenged in our ways of thinking or we're being updated on things. And again, like you're not getting trained in IFS by going to conferences. You have to pay that out of pocket for the trademark copyright in the little circle symbol version of IFS. And again, I think that moves it into cult territory. And I don't know that it is a cult. Again, I as a religious trauma therapist, I know a lot more clients who have benefited from having therapists who do IFS than people who have been triggered and or had any sort of psychosis from the IFS. Again, if somebody had induced psychosis in a client who had religious trauma, they'd probably blame the religion and not the therapy. So whatever. I'm not That's why I didn't frame it as is IFS a cult. Again, I think if Richard Schwartz had existed in another time period, then it might have been. But now, no. I mean, I don't think there's the coercive control. I think, again, therapists sometimes could get dogmatic about it. I think Schwartz himself is dogmatic about it. But again, you're spending money on it. You're not having to like move on a compound. You don't have to finish the training. Yes, you don't get the certification then, but like again, there's too much freedom as when we look at sort of the continuum of control. I think as you get into like Janja Lalich, who's great, and I love her work as a religious trauma therapist, as a not even religious trauma therapist, as a cult expert. She also talks about like bounded choice, and so when you only have limited choices, again, I think if you are trained in IFS, then what you see with problems everywhere is parts work. And that gets a little bit into the bounded choice. But when we expand and we look a little bit about like Stephen Hassan's bite model, again, the only way IFS could be a cult is if like you did your schooling all through that and it was the only thing you were ever exposed to. And then you had to do it that way, or you got kicked out of like your practice and then you didn't get to make ends meet anymore. Like, that would be bad. But again, I don't think that really exists. That's just purely hypothetical, and it could exist. I just don't think it does. I think what happens is a lot more, it's a cult of personality. And so Schwartz carries a big price tag. Bessel van der Kolk, again, who like did great work in updating how we understood trauma and working with it, and is a bit of an asshole and did not write the definitive guide to understanding trauma. He wrote a very popular book that made him expensive. And that was true of Freud too, right? Like Freud was at a time and place where hierarchies existed specifically for men to be at the top of their field. And again, when we look at other fields, we know a bunch of dudes just took their wives' work and got published because they were men. Um, Freud was wrong about most things. Freud was snorting cocaine and going to give lectures and saying people couldn't tell that he was on coke. Freud was puffing on his cigars and thinking about his stepmom. Like, I don't know. He got a lot wrong. He's not somebody who we should still have like on any sort of pedestal, let alone trying to practice the way that he did. And to be fair to psychodynamic therapists, they're not practicing specifically the way Freud did. It has had to have been updated and changed over the years. Again, that's a case where I'm like, throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like that's started from such an unscientific place. Whatever we're still doing to try and make it fit isn't worth just picking a better model. But like, I brought up Stephen Hassan's bite model. Hassan's like an interesting character too, because again, I think he gets a lot of stuff wrong. And I think he's somebody who became a quote unquote expert, not that he attached that to himself, but his book sold really well. He became a big get for getting on a podcast and a bunch of other stuff where he started like becoming an expert on stuff. And then his age showed through and he started being like, trans people are getting hypnotized by tranny porn on the internet. And that's a real problem. And I was like, ooh, bro, nope. Like you're off on this and your language about it isn't great and like being a bit bigoted. And I just don't think he like understood it. I don't know. I didn't follow all the drama. Part of the reason I don't want to get into like drama on the podcast is I just generally can't be bothered to keep up with anybody who's sort of in a celebrity sort of space. The only celebrities I'm like loosely up to date on are pro wrestlers and celebrities doing them. I'm having to stretch the word there, right? I can tell you what Danhausen is up to. And if you don't know who Danhausen is, it's proven my point. You should know who Danhausen is. I will say. The just working on by episode 200, this would be a straight wrestling podcast. But the model of person trying to be helpful is genuinely helpful, gathers a following because of how helpful they are, becomes a quote unquote expert, is raised in some sort of status symbol, whether that's financially, whether that's professionally, whatever it is. And then again, like loses touch with reality, starts believing they can do no wrong, starts believing they have access to some sort of capital T truth, starts believing that they and they alone see the universe in the correct way. That's a problem. And whether that, again, is a religious leader or that's a researcher or that is a therapist or that is a politician, like that pipeline becomes problematic. And again, I think it's just when any belief system becomes too dogmatic to not be able to take criticism. As a religious trauma therapist, like that is a thing that we see with a lot of with a lot of religion that goes wrong is the religion becomes far too rigid. And again, it's based off of some prophet, some leader, some person somewhere who, like, I'm going to say got too big for their britches, and the religion can't see that, right? Gosh, I really don't want to throw shade at my contemporaries. Richard Schwartz is not my contemporary. I don't have a problem throwing shade there. It's why other people who work in like the religious trauma fields will still like get a bunch of stuff wrong. Hassan is a good example. Stephen Hassan, not Hassan Piker, the very famous streamer. Stephen Hassan, whose work by and large I've enjoyed and think is pretty good. It's when he's on podcasts, he's off the cuff, he's doing interviews that it gets worse. And like arguably that's true of Richard Schwartz too, right? Like here's the nuance that I'm trying to bring to this conversation is we can be critical of the things they say, and is their off the cuff interview different than their published work? Now for Schwartz, I don't think it is. Again, I think he isn't using this as metaphor. And for as long as he's been a famous person, he's been very consistent that parts work isn't metaphor work. There's actually all these separate entities inside of you. And like, that is incorrect. We don't have some sort of core essence that evaporates when we die. We lose a bit of heat because we stop producing energy. This is explained through the scientific method, not through some sort of thing. And like, again, Schwartz makes it pseudo-religious, and that's when it becomes a problem. Peter Thiel, owner of Palantir, all around bad human being, tech fascist, thinks that Greta Thunberg is the Antichrist. Because again, like, when we move too far away from the scientific method, when our methods become unscientific, we land at religion. And like, religion is just superstitious thinking. It's just magical thinking as explanations for things that probably do have scientific explanations elsewhere. And I'm not getting dogmatic about science, right? Science gets a ton of stuff wrong. I think when science is done well, it updates itself and it's continually self-critical, and it's like a learning model. It isn't a thing to be dogmatic about. It isn't capital S science. The scientific method isn't trademarked. If the world ceased to exist and humans, came out of some sort of, let's say, a nuclear winter in some future and rebuilt civilization, the scientific method would appear again, relatively unchanged, in a way that modern religions and old religions wouldn't, right? There's no way to like reinvent those with the same specifics they have now, because they're not based on anything. Scientific method is just observable information. It is a way to categorize. It's a methodology to look at what we are observing. And that's why it's so useful. But again, it in and of itself isn't, stuff gets wrong all the time. Usually it's the observer's fault, but also we observe different things. People who observe two different things on different ends of the world can talk in a way that isn't what was happening back in the day. That's why, like, we sort of have this idea of the Great Enlightenment being a certain number of people. It's like, nah, there have been really smart people throughout history, and we just have a very like Eurocentric version of history that we learn about. It's very waspy. It's very male for sure too, in a way that it just isn't accurate. And part of the reason that thought leaders are so hard to break through now is like, we all have access to so much information. But again, these people still pop up. Again, Van der Kolk, Richard Schwartz is a good example. I don't even know who came up with EMDR. So again, like, as critical as I am of EMDR and its very questionable scientific backing, that person at least hasn't gone and like made it about themselves. They have made it about the thing, because again, EMDR is also behind a huge paywall. I don't know any, well, that's not true. I was gonna say I don't know any famous marriage or family therapist, but like John Gottman would be the example in my field. I think his stuff is pretty accessible, but to work with him specifically, I don't even know if he's still doing stuff. He's aged. To work with him specifically is expensive, but like, his stuff's pretty accessible. Again, like, 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work is old, and certainly not the be all end all of self-help books for couples, but like, some of that stuff's still pretty good and still holds up, and it's $14, in the way that like No Bad Parts is also accessible. But like, I think Gottman's work, you don't need to go get certified. People do, which says more about therapists and our insecurity as a profession probably than anything else. So Gottman's a good example. Again, like, got really big, got famous, made it big, and like, capitalism took over. The thing that's interesting with Gottman is like, he isn't a therapist, never was. He's a mathematician, he's a researcher. So, actually, the more I think about Gottman, the more he is probably, again, like, an example of this, where person starts doing something helpful, gets famous because they're so helpful, gets elevated in status, and then loses touch with reality and becomes potentially problematic. Again, this is all cult leader stuff. So like, we see abuses happen here in other dynamics in a way that I think it's financial abuse. Sure. And I think it's unhelpful, but I don't know that I would say it's like abusive. It's exploitative. predominantly from a financial setting. And again, in a way that like puts good therapists needing to like pay off their student loans and afford all their trainings and stuff behind a paywall. And you're like, Jeremy, you don't take insurance. Like, that is accurate. That's more of being in the profession for a long time than like, I'm so special and have all the trainings. I can barely market like my specialties because I get bored with them myself. Again, like, I think there's a difference between I know it and I know it so well that everyone should pay me extra because I know so much, to like, be like, yeah, I'm pretty good at like a handful of things that I work with. And outside of that, I don't know. I have a good referral list because I am not an expert in all things. And the way that I work isn't helpful for everybody who wants help, even in the things that I'm pretty good at working with. I think the audacity to like write a book and then be like, everyone should pay me a shit ton of money for this is very high. And again, I'm criticizing capitalism here. I don't know that everybody I'm listing here is like, again, huffing their own farts and drunk on their own power. Like, I think some of it is just like, yeah, at some point you get so many requests to do speaking tours and all invitations, you probably get an agent. And then like some of the therapists that I like, some people I criticize for their business practices, it's like, yeah, they paid a business coach. And because the business coach knows more about doing business, they do what the business coach says. And then I look at their practice and say, wow, that's really unethical. I like this therapist and I really hate the way they do business. And it's like, yeah, that is ultimately more a critique of capitalism than anything else. I wish therapists had like, I don't know. I don't even want to say more self-confidence, because I had take a peek at like the therapy subreddit every once in a while, and it is just horrifically bad therapy on there. I wish self-awareness was higher across entities. And even as I say something like that, like, gosh, that sounds conceited. My self-awareness is high enough to be like very critical of myself to a problematic degree, probably more than I'm so arrogant. But again, it's being able to like hold that nuance. And that's not how you make money, I guess. It's why I don't make a lot of money, I guess. It's why I'm not famous. I don't have that big book. I don't have Schumacher style therapy. It would be cooler if we did it like that, like different schools of pro wrestling. I didn't want to bring wrestling back up. Are different styles. So you have strong style. That's how we should name schools of thought and therapy, or like different martial arts. Like, yeah, that would be cool. I guess that's just what like IFS is. We just have lame names. That's all right. Therapy's kind of lame. The idea of like being helpful should be accessible, right? And again, like wanting to help someone, there should be some humility in that process, instead of like grandiosity and like expertise. Which is why, again, like religion is so problematic. The idea that you have the only proper understanding of the universe and everyone else is wrong is like incredibly arrogant. It's just like, you're the center of the universe is wild. It's a wild stance to take. But if you get people believing that, then it's really easy to abuse them. So there we go. And, as religion dips and there are less people who are part of an organized religion, we see this dynamic playing in other places. Again, religions don't have a monopoly on this. We see it with like the cult of personality around Elon Musk and like some of the tech fascists, people who just needed somebody to tell them, that's really stupid and you're a moron for thinking like that. And people stopped telling them that because they had so much money. And like, that's a bad way to do things. That's why the world is burning and falling apart. And the tech fascists are like, maybe we should flee the country. Maybe we shouldn't do things based on how much money you can get for them. And again, like if it was all just about being helpful, like I think IFS is helpful. I don't really have an issue with that. I have an issue with one person's personal beliefs. And the only reason I know their personal beliefs is because they're famous enough to go on podcasts and do interviews all the time about it. That's all. So, yeah, I think cult is the wrong word. I think cult of personality shows up in a lot of leadership dynamics across the board. And I think it usually goes poorly. I wish it went poorly all of the time so people would stop being so rewarded for it. I wish there were more consequences for it beyond just the crash and burn. Sometimes we get that where we see people get their sort of comeuppance from getting too big of a head, going beyond their actual skill level, going beyond things that they could actually prove and stick to. But grifters are going to grift, and some of the good grifters, not morality-wise grifters, but some of the people who are good at grifting get out while they're getting still good, and they get away with it. Womp womp. So, yeah, I don't know. To any young therapists who are listening, don't pay all that money for those big certifications. You simply do not need them. You're very good at helping people. If you have the evidence that the people you help are helped by working with you, your clients will let you know if you're doing good work or not. And you can read books and you can watch videos and listen to podcasts. And when you find something that really resonates, if you feel the need to learn more because you want to, that's great. But I think too many therapists are out here chasing certifications because we're insecure ourselves. I think a good reason to get a certification is you want to learn more and you have a nuanced take on your clients, and knowing one more school of thought, having one more certification isn't making you that much better of a therapist. It's not the final puzzle piece. It's just a different tool to use. But again, understanding schools of thought as tools to use, read the books, find the information that is readily available. What's helpful for people in therapy again and again and again, every time we research this, is the therapeutic relationship. Do you feel safe with your therapist? Do you feel heard? Does it seem like they genuinely have your best interests in mind and they're trying to help you? That's what makes therapy work. It's not any specific school of thought. It helps when therapists are practicing from a lens that they think is helpful. I think that lends authenticity to the process more than it lends, again, some sort of capital T truth. And I didn't even get into philosophy and academia, but this is a huge issue in academia. Again, I think it's where you see some great thinkers, postmodernism. I love Foucault's first 4 books. And after that, he falls off. He probably does too many drugs and starts doing the thing where he talks about doing a lot of drugs and having a lot of kinky sex, which is cool. And I'm not throwing shade at either of those things, but your understanding of the human experience because you got laid is not particularly interesting or useful to other people. Same with psychedelics. I'm a big fan and cannot wait for them to get legalized in the therapeutic setting. And somebody who's don't go talk about your experiences because it's just that. It's just your experience. And again, the hubris that's required to say my experience is so all encompassing that it can then therefore help other people is pretty wild. A lot of therapists get into therapy because they're messed up themselves, or they were at a point in their life where therapy was really helpful and then they wanted to do that. And I think the second, the latter option is better than the former, but to want to help people is good. Again, I think therapy would look so much different if we had a better economic system. I think if people's basic needs were met, people would approach therapy different and therapists would approach therapy different. And we wouldn't even be having this conversation because there would be no benefit to trying to get famous and become an expensive self-help guru. I could list some therapists who I really like, who did not ever get famous outside of their field. And, somebody who's older than me could be oh, you love Michael White. He's actually really expensive to book. And yeah, I would have no way to know that. I don't. My experience, pretty niche. I love Harleen Anderson. I don't know how much she is to book, but I've been at conferences with her, and I'm guessing it's not something that's going to break the bank like Richard Schwartz. I even know this for like low-level comedians. I like Charlie Berens, and if you're in the Midwest, you know the Manitowoc Minute, and you know some of his comedy, and it's really funny. And I can tell you like the rate that he charges for an hour to do like a stand-up show at a college is higher than you would think. And also the colleges that are spending money on stuff like that while cutting mental health funding is also a non-zero number. Not great. But I don't need to rant and rave about my own personal experience. I think we as a species do better in community because we need community around us to, again, tell us when we're getting a little too full of ourselves. Again, I think we need that reality check. I think people need to interact with people who are smarter than them in other ways. Again, it's one of the things that is really helpful for me is like I spend my time around a lot of people who are so much smarter than me, and shockingly in a lot of ways dumber than me. And that sort of has built my worldview of like, yeah, we're all really, really, really wonderful in our own unique ways. And we're all really, really, really befuddlingly silly in our other ways. It's a new take on one of my older mantras. See, I'd like to think I'm good at words, and I just stumbled over befuddlingly, which isn't a word. So, but to spend time around people who are like really good at things that are different than the things that you're really good is helpful for us. Again, it's part of the reason community is so important. And you don't have to be good at everything. Young therapists, you don't have to be good at everything. Get a good referral list and refer people out. My clients who are doing really, really well are often coming to me after working with other therapists or still have other therapists. They have their team of specialists. And again, that's not accessible to everyone. I get that. But wouldn't that be cool? I think it would be cool. So, yes, be wary of therapists who become high priests. Beware of high priests in general. Beware of dogma. Again, anything that is not at least being open to self-criticism, being open to external criticism as well. Anything that isn't constantly looking at itself with a critical eye deserves to be looked at with a critical eye. That's the point. Nonprofits, for-profit organizations, whomever may tune into my podcast, stop overpaying for people who are the big name. Get just like a regular person. Part of my approach to my podcast, and this is not like I understand podcasting and capital T truth, but part of my approach to podcasting was getting regular people on. Yes, I've chased some big names. I've gotten some big names on the podcast, and some of my favorite episodes, both as a host and for like episodes that actually turned out well and had good listenership, were not the big famous people. Some of the people who are the most work to land on the podcast have the lowest number of downloads because those people don't care about my podcast and didn't promote it at all because it's one of a dozen that they've been on in the past year. And I'm not throwing shade. Like, that's not sour grapes. I'm not complaining. That's a thing that I learned by being in the podcast game for a while of like, oh, when I get some therapist who's a really great therapist, but isn't a big social media person, isn't famous, hasn't written a book, blah, 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 blah. They're like so jazzed to be on a podcast. And if it goes well, they're going to tell everybody they know that they were on a podcast. That makes so much more of a difference. Again, I'm not pulling podcast numbers where I'm a top 5 earner. My podcast does not make me money. But I think those conversations are a lot more rich and interesting. And I also think, again, like chasing the big name is not always great. My favorite episode is with a comic book writer who really honestly had no reason to say yes, other than I was like, let's talk about religious trauma in comics. Also, you like pro wrestling. I too love pro wrestling. Should we be friends? And we're not friends, but he did agree to be on my podcast. So that's cool. In another world, we could be friends. So So again, like there's nuance there. I'm not saying like don't get people who are really interesting that you want to talk to speak at your conference, but also like to be like, ooh, we got Richard Schwartz. Everyone should be so excited is, I don't know, just tone deaf, especially for that guy specifically. If you're dropping thousands of dollars to go to a conference because Bessel van der Kolk is talking, like I would say, don't do that. Find a more affordable option because he doesn't have the keys to the universe. You can find a lot of other people who are doing trauma work who are probably more affordable, and you very well might learn more from them. You know, it's really specific to therapists today. Other people, again, like find a therapist who's a good fit. If you're tuning in just for the mental health things, and like thanks for sticking it out to minute 42 here. Like, yes, hopefully whoever you're working with gives you other resources. I tend to send my clients, especially when I'm doing like stuff with neurodivergence, like I'm really helpful at understanding a specific neurotype because I have it and I've lived with it for a long time. And I know not just what it's like to live with it, but also all the psychology stuff. Not all, but I have this background in psychology and also lots of years of living with this neurotype, but it's not everybody's version of ADHD. And so like, yeah, I send them a bunch of stuff from other ADHD therapists, from other authors, writers. I generally send them to links that have huge resource directories attached to them. Therapyforpetpeople.com, which is Dr. Christine Henry, who's been on the podcast, and ndtherapist.com. Great resources. ndtherapist.com is a directory for neurodivergent therapists, which is lovely. And their resource tab is really good. And so like, again, your therapist should be sending you stuff. On my bookshelf is a book by Stephen Hassan, Marlene Winnell's Leaving the Fold, a bunch of books by Richard Carrier. I think I still have Gottman. I think I probably have 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. Again, like the therapist saying, here are other voices on this topic. Here are things that might help you learn. If what I have said to you is helpful and interesting, perhaps you would learn also things from this person. I think like that's a green flag, green therapy flag. Your therapist offers you a bunch of resources because again, that personal relationship that you have with your therapist and that personalized information you're getting from your therapist is unique and very helpful. And also they learned it somewhere. The information they're sharing, they learned. It's not theirs. It's not particularly unique, probably. So, yeah, there. That's accessible for everyone. Green flag of therapy. Your therapist offers you a ton of other resources. I also, unsolicited, offer book recommendations, especially comic books. It's the middle shelf of my bookshelf. The top shelf is Malazan Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson. So everybody should read that. Probably not good for your mental health. It is very depressing at certain points, but it's a lovely journey to go on. It's not. It's a super depressing journey to go on. It's a worthwhile experience. We're off topic. Man, I should get Stephen Erickson on the podcast. That would be awesome. See, nuance of I just said don't do that. I have not paid anybody for being on my podcast because I don't have podcasts to make money. I've given people some mugs, some t-shirts. So, all right. I don't know. I don't have a good outro here. If you're doing parts work with your therapist and it is nice and helpful, that's great. If you are wondering if it's more than a metaphor, it's not. If you're somehow tuned in still at this point in the podcast and you're still a religious person, like if you're wondering if it's more than a metaphor, it's not. Getting a little chirpy here at the end. All right, that's what I got. I'm going on vacation soon, but I'll have an episode. I'll have an episode before I go on vacation. I'm saying it now so I remember to do it before I leave on vacation. But take care of yourself, you know. Take care of yourself, take care of somebody else. Go on vacation if you are interested in that and capable of doing it. It's good to take breaks. All right. Yeah. Take care of yourself. Take care of somebody else. Peace and love. All the good things. Peace out, y'all.